why the Makkah Pact raises more questions than it answers. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan signed their joint defense agreement in Makkah on Friday, 7th August, and much of the Muslim world was excited. The International Union of Muslim Scholars called it a step toward unity. The OIC welcomed it. The location and the actors involved have led commentators to reach for the phrase Muslim NATO, on the belief that the military cooperation carries a clause like Article 5 of NATO. An attack against one is an attack against all. Yet one need not go far to find skepticism. Some read the Union as America's own doing, a Sunni bloc engineered against Iran. Others see it as Turkey's ambition to draw the whole region under its umbrella, or as Saudi Arabia securing its own protection while positioning itself at the center of the Muslim world. As much as optimism has been raised, so too has concern. But whichever interpretation one favors, there are questions this pact still needs to answer. A Muslim alliance? The pact, as far as we know, is an agreement between three nation-states. Beyond the symbolism of its venue, it carries no explicitly Islamic language, nor does it draw on any tenet of Islamic diplomacy. It does not present itself as a defense of Muslims as such. Nearly a year in the making, it has revolved around questions of capability, deterrence, and mutual interest. This is how modern diplomacy tends to work. Every state brings something to the table: energy, nuclear weapons, diplomatic weight, and soldiers. Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has said he expects Egypt to join once technical matters are resolved, calling Cairo a natural partner. Egypt had, in fact, already been featured in prior talks about the framework. Another sign that this is a strategic club, organized around capability and convenience, with membership decided by what a state brings, rather than by any bond it shares with the rest. Moreover, referring to this agreement as a Muslim NATO contains two errors. Firstly, the principle of mutual defense is not a concept that Muslims would import from NATO. It is an obligation of the Ummah, an obligation that the agreement does not invent, but rather embodies. Secondly, whilst NATO makes it clear from the outset against whom it was established, the Treaty of Mecca does not demonstrate the same clarity. It is not explicitly stated in its stance against whom it stands. Against which adversary? NATO was formed against the Soviet Union. The Makkah Pact has named no adversary. Body language and timing have said more than words. Skeptics have asked whether the Makkah trio amounts to a Sunni bloc against Iran. Given that its announcement came during a war that saw Iran strike Saudi Arabia, which hosts U.S. bases, has only deepened that suspicion. Honestly, though, the framework predates the war. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan signed a strategic mutual defense agreement in September 2025, with Turkey joining the arrangement later. That suspicion has since been directly addressed by both sides, and taken at face value, should quiet the Sunni bloc reading. Yet such reassurances settle the question only on paper. Whether it holds will be tested by events, not statements. The American side has stayed conspicuously silent. One might expect the current U.S. president, fond of styling himself a peace ambassador, to be quick to claim credit. Instead, the loudest voice has been one of his supporters, Representative Joe Wilson, who praised the pact as an accomplishment of President Donald Trump. If nothing else, this tells us Washington does not see the pact as a threat. Perhaps it shouldn't, since it is defensive in nature. However, the deeper reason is that the signatories include Trump's favorite ally, the one who nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize, and one of America's closest partners in the region. If the U.S. had no stake in it, it would simply be another friends club. Then there is the Zionist question. A defense pact signed in Makkah, backed by the Muslim world's most capable conventional army, its only nuclear arsenal, its deepest financial reserves, and custodian of its two holiest sites, ought to unsettle a state that has spent decades treating any Muslim coordination as an existential threat. And yet, Israel's official posture has remained cautious rather than alarmed, even as elections approach, when one might expect both Netanyahu and his rivals to invoke the pact, either to argue for a stronger incumbent or to expose his failures. No formal statement has rejected the pact, except that Amichai Chikli, Israel's radical diaspora affairs minister, has called for a counter-alliance involving the UAE, Cyprus, Greece, and Somaliland, describing the Makkah Pact as a dangerous Sunni alliance. Israeli government's posture should give pause to anyone reading the agreement as organized around the defense of Palestine or the dismantling of occupation, because it is not that, and the clearest proof is not what Israel has said, but what these three states have not. Not one of them has tabled Palestine at the table that produced this pact, not the genocide in Gaza, not the siege, not the annexation creeping through the West Bank, while the ink on this agreement was still drying. If the Ummah's suffering cannot move the states best positioned to address it, then whatever this pact defends is not yet the Ummah. Should we reject it then? The task now is not to tear the pact down, but to insist that it grow into something worthy of where it was signed. A pact worthy of that name would leave no room for doubt. It would take a clear stand against the Abraham Accords track, because no state can claim ummatic legitimacy while normalizing with an occupying power. It would speak plainly against the injustice carried out by America and its allies in the region, and it would refuse to host American bases on its soil. None of this requires naming an adversary outright, but it does require a body language that leaves no room for doubt about where the pact stands. Indeed, Muslim nations should not need formal signatures to uphold what the Prophet described, that the believers are one body, such that when one limb suffers, the rest respond with fever and sleeplessness. If this is indeed a pact among the most powerful Muslim countries, it is a welcome development. But it should worry us if such an agreement fails to meet even that bare minimum. It should instead seek justice, one that unsettles not only the Zionist entity, but every other oppressor. But if any Muslim ally comes to serve the interests of oppressors or becomes complicit in oppression itself, then in the ummatic sense, we would no longer be speaking of a Makkah Pact, but of Western puppet logic dressed in ihram. May Allah unite the ranks of the Muslims.